Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, veterans, families, and distinguished guests. And welcome to the National D-Day Memorial and the 80th anniversary commemoration of D-Day invasion. My name is Luke Carrico, and it is my pleasure today to serve as your commentator for the aerial review of a variety of vintage military aircraft. We do have a few changes to your program, including the omission of the Beechcraft Stagger Wing, the Boeing Stearman biplanes, and the Douglas C-47 due to maintenance issues. However, overhead right now is that of the Waco PT-14 biplane. A worthy start to our flyovers today, the Waco biplane helping us to serve as the first step as part of a 12-week, three-phased process to train American pilots during World War II. Newly minted aviation cadets would arrive to their training bases and begin their flight training in these fairly simple, fabric-covered wood construction biplanes. The Waco predated World War II with its first flight in 1939, and they are powered by a 220 horsepower radial engine. It was from primary training in aircraft such as the Waco that aviation cadets would graduate onwards to basic training and then on to advanced before being assigned their frontline combat aircraft. The U.S. Army Air Force called it the PT-14, PT standing for primary trainer. It was a 1,000-pound airplane that was docile and fairly easy to fly. However, the landing gear, being so close together, would sometimes prove to be dangerous during takeoffs and landings, and cadets often became victims of the dreaded ground loop. Nearly every American pilot on D-Day had experience flying these types of airplanes. Ladies and gentlemen, the Waco PT-14. Student pilots would earn 60 to 70 hours of flying time before being sent off to combat. And as the war progressed and more pilots were needed, this 12-week training process was often hurried, and then sometimes in as little as 9 weeks, there are accounts of some aviators being sent to combat, often with less than 20 hours of total flying experience. The Waco is, of course, a two-seat trainer, the instructor sitting in the back with the student in the front. And I will also make mention to you that many Wacos did not have electrical systems, and communication between the instructor and the student was performed by something known as a Gosport, with a funnel on one end and a rubber hose feeding it into ear cups of the cadet's helmet, where the instructor would then shout the instructions. After the war, many of these biplanes took on civilian roles, available to be purchased surplus for just $600. Many were converted into crop dusters, agricultural sprayers, and into airshow platforms reminiscent of the days of the barnstormers, where a pilot would fly maneuvers over a town, land in a farmer's field, and sell rides for a penny per pound. The aircraft today joining us from the Flying Circus based in Bealeton, Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, a very nice round of applause, if you will, for the Waco PT-14 biplane.
Let us pray. Almighty God, today we are humbly grateful for the freedom to gather and remember the bravery and sacrifice of those who served 80 years ago on Operation Overlord. Scripture reminds us, greater love hath no man more than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. As we honor their sacrifice and pay tribute to the D-Day veterans present, we also remember with thanksgiving the collaboration between the Allied forces and those who planned and oversaw the Normandy beach landings. As we listen to the accounts of that day, grant us similar courage to recognize and restrain evil in our own day, and may those who lead the nations of the world defend human liberty so that we may live peaceably one with another. Amen.
Hats. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Return.
Please be seated. On behalf of the Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers of the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, I am pleased to welcome each of you to the National D-Day Memorial on this 80th anniversary of the Allied landings in Normandy. We are grateful to have with us today a number of officials, including the Honorable Governor Glenn Youngkin, Madame Caroline Mavosse, the Consul General of France, our embassy representatives, including officials from the embassies of New Zealand, Belgium, Canada, the United Kingdom, and France, as well as members of the Virginia National Guard, distinguished representatives from the Virginia House of Delegates, the Virginia Senate, and the U.S. House of Representatives. We are also pleased to welcome military personnel from NATO Headquarters Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, known as HQ ACT, and HQ Joint Force Command Norfolk. We have over 30 NATO representatives joining us, and many of them, along with members of the Virginia National Guard, will serve as veteran escorts later today. We are so pleased to have such a large NATO representation because not only were the Normandy landings a profound demonstration of international cooperation and commitment, but also because a crucial legacy of D-Day was the relationships it established post-war. The Marshall Plan of 1948 and the cooperation that ensued led to the establishment of NATO in 1949. The North Atlantic Treaty detailed the founding principles for a security community of democratic nations and reminds us today of the shared commitment to strengthening and defending democratic principles around the world. We also welcome the many families of veterans who are with us now, including the family of Waverly Woodson, who was a 21-year-old black medic on June 6, 1944, a member of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. Just this week, Woodson was posthumously awarded, Just this week, Woodson was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor in the U.S., for saving over 200 lives during the Allied invasion of Normandy, despite the fact that he himself was wounded. It is a recognition long overdue. We are grateful to his family and the many others who have joined us today to reflect on the service and sacrifices of a loved one. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of you, whatever your role, for all you have done and continue to do in keeping this memorial and the stories of the heroes of June 6, 1944 alive, and in so doing, honoring the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice of the Allied forces on D-Day. Most importantly, thank you to our D-Day and World War II veterans. Your achievements are not forgotten, as seen by the crowd here this morning and all those watching us now. Finally, as is custom here, we will dispense with formal introductions of the speakers who follow me. Our intent in doing so is to focus on what is said rather than the person saying it. Later, we will specifically recognize the D-Day and World War II veterans who are here. But what follows in the next hour is an overview of the history they helped write. As this narrative unfolds, it will become plain that its subject is not war. Rather, character, unity, and a spirit of togetherness that allowed for Allied success and ultimate victory. Because of this, we are especially gratified to involve young people in our program today, from our Army Junior ROTC assisting with the remembrances to the Boy Scouts selling water and the Enduring Freedom Honor Team students performing later in the day. They, along with each of you, represent several generations here this morning, evidence that the legacy of D-Day lives on. Thank you again for your presence here today. Please enjoy the ceremony.
General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, Order of the Day. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of the Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man-to-man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. You will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon the great and noble undertaking.
Prime Minister Winston Churchill's address to Parliament, 6th of June, 1944. I have also to announce to the House that during the night and the early hours of this morning, the first of a series of landings in force upon the European continent has taken place. In this case, the liberating assault fell upon the coast of France. An intense armada of upwards of 4,000 ships, together with several thousand smaller craft, crossed the Channel. The Anglo-American allies are sustained by about 11,000 frontline aircraft, which can be drawn upon as may be needed for the purposes of the battle. So far, the commanders who engage report that everything is proceeding according to the plan. And what a plan! This vast operation is undoubtedly the most complicated and difficult that has ever taken place. It involves tides, wind, waves, visibility, both from the air and the sea, and the combined employment of land, air and sea forces in the highest degree of intimacy and in contact with conditions which could not and cannot be fully foreseen. Complete unity prevails throughout the Allied armies, and the whole process of opening this great new front will be pursued with the utmost resolution, both by the commanders and by the United States and British governments for whom they serve.
While the fighters receive a lot of the fame in the skies above Normandy, joining the nearly 11,600 Allied aircraft during D-Day were also that of the liaison platforms, also known as Army Cooperation Aircraft. One of those examples is working its way inbound now, of which is the Aranca L-16. It was affectionately known as the Grasshopper. They were adapted from general aviation aircraft, serving the roles of observation, light reconnaissance, delivering messages, and performing light transport, especially when there was a need to take off and land in very short distances. The name Grasshopper came to be when an Army pilot, Henry Wand, was directed to fly a message from Fort Bliss, Texas, to Cavalry Major General Ennis Swift at his field HQ. The general witnessed Wand's fairly rough landing and commented something along the lines of, "You look like a darn grasshopper out there." And when he sent the pilot back to Fort Bliss, he sent him with a message that read, quote, "Send Grasshopper." Bliss's personnel were baffled by the letter until Henry Wand shared with them the story, and shortly thereafter, all of the Army's liaison aircraft took on the moniker. Also utilized by the Civil Air Patrol, hunting for U-boats off the East Coast, these airplanes have a top speed of a blistering 90 miles per hour. Many general aviation manufacturers supported the transition of popular civilian airplanes into these liaison platforms, including Stinson with the L-1, Taylorcraft with the L-2, Aranca with the L-3, as well as the L-16 that we see today. Stinson also produced the L-5 Sentinel, the L-6 Interstate Cadet, and North American Aviation later in 1946 with the L-17. Our aircraft today painted in the olive drab over neutral gray paint scheme that was typical of many U.S. Army Air Corps and Air Force aircraft. A typical U.S. Army combat division would operate 6 to 8 of these Grasshoppers for spotting duties. And one American pilot named Charles Carpenter, who was homesick and dissatisfied with his role flying as an artillery spotter, bolted 6 M1A1 bazookas to the wing struts of his Piper L4 to rain fire down onto German Panzer tank columns. He took on the nickname of Bazooka Charlie. His daughter, Carol Apaki, later wrote in an article, quote, "It was like a sparrow trying to attack an elephant, except this sparrow had fangs." The liaison aircraft, most important, and played their role in Operation Overlord. And one of those Aranca L3s is on display here at the memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, a very nice round of applause for its fly past today of the Aranca L-16 Grasshopper.
Carl Cartledge, 101st Airborne Division. There was a great feeling in the air, the excitement of battle. My plane was number 44. We would be the first to land in France just 15 minutes before the Pathfinders. The flight time from Portlandville to Utah Beach would be 57 minutes to cover 137 miles. 57 miles turned out. We turned 90 degrees southeast and flew over the Channel Islands, and then turned due east, overland to Utah. The red light snapped at the door. Stand up and hook up. There was a stamping of feet, snap fasteners clicking shut on the static line. 23, okay, I yelled, and quickly the numbers went down to 1. 1 okay. We shuffled lockstep and halted, ready to go. We were coming down to 1,500 feet fast, and the coast was just ahead. We crossed into France. Immediately, I was hit by the strong odor of gun smoke, and ahead of us was a sea of tracers, thick enough to walk on. There was no way we were not going to be hit. No one had to tell us what it was when we first heard it for the very, very first time. It sounded like rocks in a tin can when the bullets hit our aircraft. Our plane began to take evasive action. We continued to be hit. The rock sounds came up and went, but we stayed up. 3 of our 45 planes were shut down. Minutes went by. Then the green light popped on. Go, Geronimo! And we all jumped. I have never been so glad to get out of an airplane in my life. The parachute slammed open. The planes were gone, taking the tracers with them. There was water everywhere below me, except a tiny small strip that I could see, and I was drifting dangerously close to the water. I pushed my thumbs up into the saddle of the chute and sat down and quickly unbuckled my leg straps, preparing for a water landing. I was working on my chest straps when my shoe caught a small tree, and I smashed into the marshy ground. There was no sound from the water, but it was obvious to us the first 12 men of Plane 44 had drowned.
James E. Bryant, 2nd Battalion, 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. H hour arrived. The tension ebbed, but excitement began to build. We piled into the glider, but foot space was very limited because of the cargo in the aisles. Everyone was uncomfortable, and there was little talking which would last the entire trip. Everyone was deep in their own thoughts. Slowly, our tow plane lumbered down the runway. The tow rope slowly began to move and was fully extended in short order. A slight jerk, we were off. The glider was airborne almost immediately, followed shortly by the tow plane. After several minutes, we reached our altitude with a sky full of planes and gliders as far as the eyes could see. I immediately noticed that we had P-47 fighter protection. After what seemed like a lengthy period of time, all aircraft had managed to get in order for the crossing. Soon we were over the channel, and though the day was overcast, we could see hundreds of ships below still pounding the enemy and delivering additional troops across the beach. It was a sight of a lifetime, with nothing comparable to ever be seen again. We crossed the French shoreline over Utah Beach at an altitude I would estimate at about 1,000 feet. We received a signal from the pilot to prepare for landing. This was the most critical time for the pilot and for us as well. First, he had to select his landing area and avoid collision with other gliders who were doing the same. The chance of a collision with another glider was a real possibility, and it did happen in some cases with disastrous consequences. Our pilot finally spotted a short and narrow clearing near a cluster of trees, and he put the glider into an abrupt descent. He maneuvered the glider between the two trees, which was a common occurrence. The wings were sheared off by the trees, but otherwise we had a safe landing. Some men experienced some minor bruises and scratches, but were otherwise unharmed. The same could not be said for many of the other gliders.
Frank Reese Mays, U.S. Army Air Corps, 8th Air Force, ball turret gunner. The briefing officer's words were clear. Okay, boys, this is it, D-Day. While that briefing was taking place, paratroopers had been jumping into France. Later, as our formation of 35 B-17s flew out of the slow-moving, watery clouds that were making their way toward Normandy, I thought about them and about the thousands of guys in the landing craft I watched beneath us. People on the ground were in for a tough day. Compressed into the ball turret of the Warhorse, our B-17, I alternately surveyed its underbelly for hits and the surrounding sky for German fighters. Our target was the concrete and steel barrier running along the Normandy shoreline, 17,000 feet below. Flak homed in on our formation. The Warhorse bucked and yawed from the concussions. Explosions up and down the beach told me the Navy gunners had found their targets. The bomb bay doors opened and 3,800-pounders dropped through. I remember looking at my watch. It was 6:15. Below, thousands of warships, transports, and landing craft crowded the channel. Rotating my turret, I glanced back toward England. As far as I could see, hundreds and hundreds of bombers blackened the sky. Coming back around, I was greeted by a burst that rolled the ship and sent a chunk of hot shrapnel into my turret, where it ricocheted off of one of the machine guns before lodging itself with pile-driver force in the thick sole of my fur-lined boot. Those people are trying to kill me, I thought. Oddly, I had not taken it so personally when a burst a moment earlier had shut down our number 3 engine and sent a stream of black fluid gushing from the underside of the wing. The flak stopped as suddenly as it had begun. A few minutes later, we were on the ground, and in less than an hour, back in the air, repaired, refueled, rearmed, and on our way back. By then, there were even more bombers up, and the sky above the big ships was black with the smoke from their firing. But I could see the ground troops were not making much headway. It had to be pure hell for those guys down there. Suddenly, screaming in on us at 10 o'clock high, there were 10 Me-109s. The Warhorse convulsed as the top turret gunner and waist gunner engaged them. A B-17 from an upper element of the formation fell away at 4 o'clock. Its number 2 and 3 engines on fire. The bomber began to roll and disappeared in a ball of fire and debris as it exploded. A second bomber, its number 3 engine blazing, drifted below my turret. I watched one of its crew bail out of the waist door and saw his parachute fill with air as he fell away from the plane. The chute of the man jumping behind him snagged on the bomber's horizontal tail elevator, and he was dragged along until the fire spewing from the number 3 engine consumed his chute. Spinning end over end, the man fell to the earth as the B-17 exploded. As the bombardier released our payload over the target, the German fighters again appeared. I engaged one without success, and then they were gone. I could see Cherbourg at 9 o'clock as we turned home through the flak and watched the explosions around the edges of the town.
Sub-Lieutenant George Jimmy Green, Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, 551st Assault Flotilla, LCA 910. I was posted to the 551st Assault Flotilla early in 1944 and on D-Day served as leader of the first wave. It was my task to take A Company of the 116th Infantry to Vierville at 6:30. I took the company commander, Captain Taylor Fellers, in my LCA. When we lowered the 6 LCAs, the seas were very heavy and all the boats had swayed viciously back and forth. My craft, 910, was hit in the stern by 911. Once we were in the water, my coxswain surveyed the damage and determined that we were still seaworthy. The stoker and the signalman reckoned they could keep us pumped out well enough to carry on. 911 was in less good condition. I think in those seas, probably taking more water at its damaged bow than its pumps could handle. Whether because of that or from hitting an underwater obstacle, 911 went under a few hundred yards offshore. I saw Petty Officer Stewart bobbing around and waving us to go on, as we had all been told to do. And I called to him that we would be back and pressed on. It was a hateful business. The troops were in full kit, the seas were dreadful, and everything in human instinct demands the rescue attempt. Looking toward the beach, I gave a signal with 2 flags, and we went to line abreast and headed in, full speed ahead, until we crunched on the beach. Captain Fellers had directed me to the precise spot he wanted us to land, but we were 30 yards from the shoreline with surf. We simply could go no further. Down came the ramp, and the door behind it opened. The center file of troops moved through the opening as rapidly as they could, but fully equipped as they were, they must go one at a time. The left followed, and the right file came last. They all got off the craft, and Captain Fellers started forming the company into skirmish lines. Then the Germans began to fire. Some sort of heavy anti-tank rounds, it seemed. Mortars started falling in, but the craters that were supposed to have been on the beach to provide cover for those troops were not there as expected, so those chaps had no cover. The beach was flat, the tide was out, and the defenders, now firing in earnest, could not be seen. I wanted to return fire, but could not find a target, and my LCA was bouncing around so badly in the surf, I feared hitting our own troops. Anxious to protect my own command and eager to find the others we had left in the water, we put out to sea. The sailor always has a great respect for the troops he carries, because with the sailor, he has a job to do, to get the troops where they are supposed to be, when they are supposed to be there. When his job is finished, the troop's job starts. If he doesn't always have the chance to say it, from his heart, he still wishes the soldier the best of luck. I wished Taylor Fellows luck, but I never saw any of them again. All my lot were killed.
Grant Gullickson, Chief Machinist Mate, USS Corey, DD 463. On June 6, 1944, Corey, with destroyers USS Fitch and USS Hobson from our division, led the invasion at Normandy, Utah Beach. At 0500, German shore batteries opened fire on us, and we returned fire for an hour and a half. I was the chief in charge of the forward engine room, and this was my general quarters station whenever we were preparing for or participating in combat operations. At about 0630, Corey received several direct hits. By the time we exited the forward engine room, the main deck was underwater, and our captain ordered abandon ship. I had lost my life vest, and I saw Chief Peterson on the main deck. He told me he remembered seeing an extra life vest in the forward chief's quarters, and I quickly headed there. The ship was strangely quiet as I proceeded to the chief's quarters. The life vest was where Chief Peterson said it was. Wearing my new life vest, I went back on the main deck, stepped into the English Channel, and swam out to a life raft. The water was extremely cold, between 52 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Within minutes of entering the water, I felt a mild concussion followed by a hissing sound. I realized that a shell had burst in the water close to me and that the shrapnel had passed just over my head. German shore batteries continued to fire into our area for about 2 hours. Several shipmates were killed, and many wounded while we were in the water. I was not hurt, but the cold water was starting to get to me, and my energy was running out. Unless rescue came soon, I wasn't going to make it. Up to now, I had my feelings under control, but then fear set in. I began to tremble and shake all over. I was truly horrified. A short time later, our sister destroyer, Fitch, appeared close by. She was firing to port while her whaleboat crews bravely and skillfully picked up Cory men to starboard. A Fitch sailor pulled me aboard the Fitch, and all the Fitch crew treated me and other Cory sailors with great care and support. Aboard Fitch, I learned that my close friend and shipmates, Chief B.J. Peterson, Charlie Brewer, and several others had been killed by shrapnel while in the water.
John Robert Bob Slaughter, Company D, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Division, Omaha Beach. We loaded into our assigned stations on the landing craft and were lowered into the sea by the davits. The channel was extremely rough, and it wasn't long before we had to help the craft's pumps by bailing water with our helmets. The cold spray blew in, and soon we were soaking wet. I could see the battleship Texas firing its 14-inch guns broadside into the coastline. In minutes, the giant swells from the recoil of those guns nearly swamped us, and it added to the sickness and misery. About 200 or 300 yards from shore, we encountered artillery fire. The craft proceeded, plowing through the choppy water as far as it could go. My thinking as we approached the beach was if this boat didn't hurry up and get us in, I would die from seasickness. As we approached the beach, the ramp was lowered. Mortar and artillery shells exploded on land and in the water. Unseen snipers concealed in the cliffs were shooting down at individuals, causing screams from those being hit. The water was turning red from the blood. All around me, dead men floated in the water, along with live men who acted as if they were dead. The Germans couldn't tell which was which. All were coming in with the tide. Lying at the edge of a high water mark, I watched the GI trying to cross the beach. He had a hard time running. I believe he was from the craft to our right. An enemy gunner cut him down, and he staggered and fell to the sand. I can still hear him screaming. A well-marked medical corpsman moved quickly to help him. He was also shot. I will never forget seeing that medic lying next to that dying soldier, both screaming for help. Within minutes, as I watched, both men fell silent and mercifully died.
Bob Sales, Jr., Company B, 116th Infantry, 29th Infantry Division, Omaha Beach. I was on the command boat with Captain Zappacosta as his radio operator, and I landed right at the Vierville Draw, where I was supposed to be. I crawled up to look over the side of the ship. We were not far from the beach, and I could not see anyone. Company A was supposed to be on that beach, and I couldn't see an A Company man. Smoke was everywhere, and just a few minutes after that, I jumped down because the coxswain said that he was going to drop the ramp. The ramp went down, and Captain Zappacosta was the first man off, and they just riddled him. It didn't kill him instantly, but he was hollering at me. Everybody who went off, they just cut them down. We got caught in a crossfire. The only thing that saved me, I stumbled out and went off the side of that ramp. Zappacosta hollered to me that he was hit, and I started toward him, and he just went down, and he didn't come back up. And I knew that was the end of him. We were cut to pieces. When I got to the beach, Dick Wright, who was the communications sergeant, who was the second man off, had been washed ashore and was still alive. And when he saw me, he tried to raise up on his arms and elbows and was trying to tell me something. When he moved to pull himself up, a sniper in the rocks hit him right in the head. If you moved, you were dead. I just crawled a few inches at a time along that beach, and whenever possible, I crawled around bodies. I watched our battalion doctor come in. He had flaming red hair, and he shouldn't have come in that early, since the beach was still red hot. He lost his own life. Every boat that came in, those 2 machine guns had them in their crossfire. Those machine guns killed everybody. A Company and B Company, landing in the same spot were annihilated.
The next aircraft that we will have the chance to see is the Supermarine Spitfire, which was flown prominently by the British Royal Air Force. Having proved itself during the Battle of Britain in 1940, the RAF initially inventoried 1,400 Spitfires in their arsenal. They were very capable and had an outstanding high-altitude fighting capability. On D-Day, more than 50 unique squadrons of Spitfires were involved for the first 24 hours of the invasion. With the mission to conduct ground attacks on German forces, the first German Air Force or Luftwaffe aircraft to be shot down was in fact conducted during the invasion by a Supermarine Spitfire, flown then by RAF pilot Johnny Holton. Spitfires flew low-level pre-D-Day reconnaissance missions over northern France, providing critical information as the operation was planned. The Spitfire's exploits made it a national symbol for the United Kingdom, and its contribution to the defense of England and in many operations throughout the European theater helped turn the tide of war. Supermarine built close to 20,000 Spitfires during their 10-year production run. Today, only around 178 survive. Flying examples can be counted on your 2 hands. Inbound now, high and overhead, the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9. The Spitfire climb in stages to reach a staggering 40,000 feet. Its maneuverability at all altitudes, both high and low, made it an outstanding fighter. Its iconic elliptical wing helped the Mark 9 reach 404 miles an hour. It was said that the Spitfire was fairly evenly matched to the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, though some early models were considered inferior to the Focke-Wulf FW 190s, another significant German airplane. It was the tactics and skill of RAF pilots and Britain's ability to quickly build aircraft that gave them an edge, eventually pushing back the Germans and supporting not only the Battle of Britain and D-Day. It was the Spitfire that helped put an end to Hitler's plan to invade the Commonwealth. Powered by the Rolls-Royce liquid-cooled Merlin engine, 1,325 horsepower, the Spitfire was armed with 4 wing-mounted 303 British machine guns and 2 20-millimeter cannons. Joining us today from the Fighter Factory Museum in Virginia Beach and sponsored by the Lynchburg Regional Air Show, the Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9.
Peter Masters, Number 3 Commando, Sword Beach. The order on which the greatest stress had been laid was get off the beach. And so we just moved up to where there was a little dune. In passing, I saw the skipper, Hilton Jones, my commanding officer, who had landed next to us on the right with the brigade HQ. I couldn't think of anything better to do, so I saluted him. It must have been the only salute on the beach on D-Day. There were mortar bombs exploding continuously. It looked like balls of fire sailing through the sky, burning globes in formation. That's what we called the sobbing sister. Rocket-fired mortars that fired a whole frame at a time. When they hit, they ignited. Our brigadier, Lord Lovett, was walking about the forming up area, urging people on. He seemed to be a man perfectly at ease, and shots and noise in general did not seem to bother him at all. Good show, he said to the bagpiper, who had piped us ashore as he came dashing up. He was panting and catching his breath, while dragging his bagpipes, as well as his other equipment. Lovett walked around the forming up area, urging everybody on. He was very calm. He carried no weapon other than his Colt 45 at his holster. Instead, he had a walking stick. Immediately behind the woods of the forming up area, we encountered the first lowland and prepared to start riding our bicycles. It was about 10:30, and we had landed at 7:30. Suddenly, there was some burst of machine gun fire close by, and I saw one of our people, a red-haired commando, lying dead on the road next to his bicycle. He had been shot by a burst of fire, and Captain Robinson had us dismount and deploy on the ground. "Now there's something you can do, Corporal Masters," Captain Robinson said. "Go into this village and see what's going on." I envisaged a reconnaissance patrol, and I asked, "How many people do I take?" He said, No, I just want you to go by yourself." That still didn't bother me. I told the captain, "Look at the scenery. I'll go around to the left, and please look for me to come back in a sweep on the right-hand side." "You still don't understand what I want you to do," said Captain Robinson. "I want you to go down the road and see what is going on." That didn't sound like much fun to me, because clearly he was trying to see where the fire was coming from, and I was to be his target. Rather than send some of his own men, he preferred to send this recently attached stranger. It felt like mounting the scaffolding of the guillotine. I frantically looked for some angle or option for improving the situation, but there really didn't seem to be one. There were no ditches of any kind, no cover walking down the road, and it was broad daylight. I suddenly remembered a film. I'd seen Errol Flynn and Cary Grant. They walked into an assembly of Indian rebels in the Khyber Pass and inadvertently found themselves in a completely hopeless situation. I always found that to be quite funny, and it came to me at this precise moment. So I yelled at the top of my voice while I walked down the road with my finger on my Tommy gun. "Everybody out," I shouted in German. "Give yourselves up. The war is over for you." But I saw no one. No one came out.
J. H. Hamilton, Royal Winnipeg Rifles, 7th Brigade, 3rd Canadian Division, Juno Beach. The water was so much more choppy than we had ever encountered. A large wave hit our landing craft. One of the twin engines was knocked out. We were some 10 miles from the beach at the time, and our sailors had quite a hard job to get us onto shore. Because of the lack of power, we were being swamped by the heavy waves. Because the waves were so high, they were washing over our landing craft. And our first casualty was Rifleman Andrew G. Munch. He was, as we all were, very, 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 very seasick. He was lying on the gunwale, and as we came in to about 2 miles offshore, a large wave washed him off. We never saw him again. We were being heavily fired upon as we approached, and I was the second man in our section. The lad in front of me was Rifleman Janelli, and as the ramp went down, he took a burst of machine fire in the stomach. There was a tracer in that burst, and you could see it coming to us. Janelli was killed instantly. I got off the landing craft and crossed the narrow sandy beach to the edge of the beach and a dune. I got some protection, but still, I suffered a piece of shrapnel lodged in my right nostril. I was unconscious for some time, and being one of the early waves on the beach, there was no first aid station. When I came to, I tried to put on a field dressing, but it was pretty hard to dress my own face. So I just continued to bleed. Finally, there was about 5 or 6 of us walking wounded, and we formed up a section. We moved off the beach and followed the route to the company inland. When we came off a narrow sandy beach, I saw a number of Canadian Scottish soldiers that had been killed on the beach. They were laying about, and the red poppies were bloom. It struck me then that the poem we had learned in school by Colonel McRae, "In Flanders fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row." That certainly struck with me, seeing the Canadians laying dead amongst the red poppies that were coming in bloom.
George Kirchner, Company D, 2nd Ranger Battalion. Ranger leads the way. The Ranger chaplain was Father Lacey from Hartford, Connecticut, who was a wonderful man. Before he left the ship on D-Day, he said, "When you land on the beach and you get in there, I don't want to see anybody kneeling down and praying. If I do, I'm going to come up and boot you in the tail. You leave the praying to me. You do the fighting." As we were going in, the LCA immediately behind mine, which contained my company commander, Captain Duke Slater, sank from all the water. As we approached the beach, I gave the order to fire our rockets, and they fired in sequence, 2 at a time. Out of our 6 ropes, 5 of them cleared the bluff, or the cliff, which is a good percentage. I hollered, "Okay, let's go," and ran off the ramp. First one out, I immediately sank in an 8 foot of water. It was a large bomb crater. Everyone else filled around the crater, and instead of being the first one ashore, I was one of the last after I paddled in there with all the weight. 2 of my boat crew were immediately hit by machine gun fire, and in anger, my first impulse was to go after the machine gun up there. But I realized that was stupid, since our mission was to get to the top of the cliff and to get on with destroying the guns. Knowing that my company commander had been sunk, I found Colonel Rudder to inform him of this event. He was starting his climb on one of the rope ladders and had his hands full and his mind full, and he didn't seem particularly interested that I was assuming command of Company D. He told me to get the hell out of there and get up and climb my rope. I couldn't understand why the Germans weren't doing more than they were doing, but I found out that the destroyer Satterlee had seen what was going on, and they were very close to shore, and they had realized that we were without fire support. They saw the Germans on top of the cliff. They steamed in close and opened fire with their guns.
Corporal William Dabney, 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. I was a balloon chief on D-Day. All my lower-ranking officers were black. My whole outfit was black. The only time I saw a white officer was when he came in for inspection or something like that. No one told us it was D-Day or that we were going into battle. We came into Omaha Beach on a landing barge. Artillery was heavy. As we approached the beach, my balloon caught fire. It happened just as I hit the beach, so I couldn't move. The only thing I could do then was unstrap the cables from myself and take cover under the dead so I wouldn't get shot. Others were dropping in front of me, behind me, and everywhere. I laid among the dead and ordered my men to lay down and play dead too.
J. Allen Mindtree, Lima Company, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division. When the shore shelling lifted, we were supposed to go straight to shore, yet while circling, many of us was getting seasick. Lieutenant Jimmy Monty, positioned at the rear of the boat, noticed this predicament, and to my surprise, he produced from his backpack and held up for all to see a whole bottle of gin. It was something most of us had not seen in years. So when he raised the full bottle as if part of a ritual to pass around, he said, "Take only a sip. It will settle your stomachs." So we all had a chance to try this remedy. The ramp went down. We began experiencing small arm fire hitting crafts and some of us. All was quiet among us. No conversation. We simply jumped into the water, chest high, as we made our way out of the water and began to run. The sand was jumping up all around us. Some were going down on their knees, some were falling flat, and some stayed behind the obstacles. Looking around, you saw other boats coming in, some being hit directly by artillery fire before the ramp was down. The one that we're in had turned, but was hit in the engine area and blew up, the coxswain sailing into the air as if on a trampoline. After reaching the bluff, many had no weapon or equipment. Digging in crossed my mind, but the effort was useless. We were just standing there under mortar and artillery fire. Many at the bluff were hit bad. Our company commander was one of the first I recognized. Many were strangers from the other outfits. Our company commander was a smallish man of Italian descent, full of vim and vigor. His dress code was always perfect. There he was, still neat and with shining boots, but with his left leg blown apart. He looked at me, and I at him. No word spoken. He just turned away in a hopeless daze. Lieutenant Monteith appeared and began shouting for his platoon. People began to pile up where from the second and even the third waves were. All were being shot down, boats hit, fighting equipment everywhere. It was obvious that something had to be done. And at this point, a Navy destroyer pulled straight towards the shore among the obstacles and began firing its bow gun directly at the pillbox above our heads. It was a wonderful and soothing sight to see someone shooting back. While this was going on, Monteith was hollering for help. It was so much noise and explosion, you had to shout. At that point, I lost contact with Lieutenant Monteith and actually never saw him again. Checking my assault jacket and arm injury, I noticed that 2 of my bar magazines were also hit, making them useless. Felt strange tossing them, yet seemed a good idea. I'm sure they saved me from chest injuries. Oddly, while I was doing this,
A small bird flew just above my head, perched on a small twig-like branch, and began to sing. Maybe this little bird, amongst all of this death and destruction, was trying to tell me something.
Evelyn Kowalchuk, U.S. Army Air Corps, 818th Air Evacuation Squadron, Omaha Beach. Each airplane could carry 24 litters suspended from different support beams in the aircraft. There was one nurse on each litter plane, and it was her job to keep those boys alive and as comfortable as she could make them on the 2-hour flight back to England. That was not easy. A flight nurse played a number of roles: healer, confessor, mother, cheerleader, all of them important, all of them demanding. We saw a lot, and we managed as best we could. Speaking in purely medical terms, I must say that our circumstances were primitive. That's the way it was then. We did what we had to do, and we did it with what was available to us. My C-47 landed on Omaha Beach. Although a number of planes were shot down, that particular danger was not very worrisome at the time. Our real concern was to get those wounded boys on the planes and to the hospital. We came in low, landed on perforated steel planking that had been placed on the sand. The engines were revving as litters were pushed through the door, and we were back in the air before several of the litters were even properly hung up. The boys I brought back to England were injured horribly, but not one of them on any of my flights died en route. Not one of them. Other nurses were not so fortunate.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's prayer for D-Day, radio broadcast, 6 June, 1944. Almighty God, our sons' pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. These men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with pleasure now to introduce to you our flyover of the North American P-51 Mustang, an aircraft considered as American as apple pie and baseball. After the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force was on a hunt for a new aircraft to augment their Supermarine Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes, and they originally requested that Curtiss build P-40s on license, but Dutch Kindleberger, chief designer at North American Aviation at the time, replied, "No, I will build you a new airplane," and the results of his efforts is the aircraft inbound right now. From pen on paper to a flying prototype in just 117 days, the P-51 Mustang made its first flight in October of 1940. Designed originally as an escort fighter, the P-51 escorted our bombers deep into Hitler's German heartland and still have enough fuel to fight when it got there. It performed its job so incredibly well that after its introduction with the Army Air Force, casualty rates for bomber crews in which they escorted were reduced by over 75%, earning the Mustang the nickname Little Friend. Flown also by the Tuskegee Airmen and many fighter groups in Europe and the Pacific, the P-51 went on to serve in the Korean conflict as well. Multiple fighter groups of Mustangs were part of Operation Overlord. Powered by the Rolls-Royce designed, Packard-built V12 Merlin engine, liquid-cooled. It features a two-stage supercharger and produces over 1,600 horsepower. It was armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns with over 1,800 rounds, 300 pounds of ammo on each wing. It was a formidable airplane, serving as the go-to aircraft for both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. Of the nearly 15,000 P-51s produced by North American, only around 75 remain in airworthy condition today. If you look very closely to the bottom of the aircraft, you will see a large air scoop. And what that scoop does is it helps cool the radiator and the oil cooler. They were located separate from the engine, and that scoop was an important part of keeping the Mustang flying. If you took damage to that scoop in combat, you wouldn't fly for much longer because you'd overheat and seize the engine, and the enemy knew that. That scoop has an exhaust port that opens on its own based on the speed in which the Mustang is flying. And it was found later in the war that this excess compressed air and that port, working much like a rocket nozzle, in fact gave the airplane extra thrust. This was what was known as the Meredith effect. That scoop was dropped down a little bit to support the airflow, and that drop design of that scoop was so revolutionary for its time that it was later used in the design of many modern aircraft, including the intake of the modern F-16 Fighting Falcon. Double Trouble 2, this immaculate P-51D Mustang, comes to us courtesy of the Fighter Factory in Virginia Beach and is sponsored by the Lynchburg Regional Air Show. As it makes its departure, a round of applause, if you will, for the North American P-51 Mustang.
As we are gathered here today to remember that momentous event 80 years ago, we also reflect on the devastating loss. To understand the true enormity of D-Day and the cost of the freedoms with which we are blessed, you only need to look at the wall that surrounds the plaza here. On those 266 bronze plaques are thousands of names. Young men who in the prime of their lives sacrificed their futures to guarantee ours. The necrology project of the National D-Day Memorial began in 2000, before the memorial was even open, with a goal of identifying by name every Allied soldier, sailor, airman, or Coast Guardsman who died on D-Day. At that time, there was no such list, no accurate account of those killed on June the 6th, much less an authoritative roster listing the names of the fallen. Estimates varied widely and often confused fatalities with casualties, killed, wounded, captured, and missing. Kara Tuckwiller, a former librarian who had a retirement job at the memorial, was tasked with finding the answer to the question of how many died on D-Day. She painstakingly tracked down and perused burial records, after-action reports, personnel files, unit histories, ship logs, headstone applications, and hometown obituaries, among many other sources. Men had the same name or similar names. Spellings varied in records. Copies were illegible. Men died on other battlefields on June the 6th, 1944. Some wounded during the Normandy invasion died in the days following D-Day. Over the better part of a decade, her research yielded more than 4,000 Allied service members' names who died while participating in the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. After her retirement, the research continued and continues still, with additional names added to the roster when evidence is sufficient to do so. We are the only organization in the world to embark on this endeavor, collecting the names of both Americans and Allies who lost their lives on June 6, 1944. Thank you. Each name is randomly presented on the bronze plaques on our wall, Americans on the west side and Allies on the east, somber and silent testaments to the cost of securing freedom. Research continues, and as new evidence is uncovered which identifies a fatality from D-Day, those names are added at that time. Today marks the largest revision to our necrology roll of honor since the original plaques were completed, and we are humbled to recognize their valor, fidelity, and sacrifice today, 8 decades after they gave their lives. Every single name on our wall reminds us of a life, a family member, friend, husband, brother, sweetheart, who made the supreme sacrifice to ensure freedom for the world. They gave all their tomorrows for our todays. Their names matter, each and every one. Our project will continue. We will not stop until every record has been checked, every discrepancy resolved, and every name honored. They deserve nothing less. To paraphrase George Patton, let us not mourn their passing. Let us give thanks that such heroes have lived. Thank you.
On this day, 80 years after they gave their lives in the cause of freedom, we recognize the sacrifice of 15 men who fell on D-Day by adding their names to our memorial wall. As I read each name, cadets from Bedford County JROTC will place a rose in our pool to symbolize a son, a brother, a comrade in arms who did not come home. With humility and gratitude, we today honor the memories of Private Stanley B. Brumback, Kentucky, U.S. Army, 23rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division, Plaque W-26. Private Lloyd J. Birchfield, Arkansas, U.S. Army, 456th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, 82nd Airborne Division, Plaque W-27. Flying Officer James Harrison Clark, Royal Canadian Air Force, 299 Squadron, Plaque E-44. Corporal James A. Finn, Arkansas, U.S. Army, 357th Infantry Regiment, 90th Infantry Division, Plaque W-106. Private James R. Hattrick, North Carolina, 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, Plaque W-66. Sergeant James V. Hegwood, Missouri, U.S. Army, 103rd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion, Plaque W-26. Second Lieutenant Richard N. Hoig, Iowa, U.S. Army Air Forces, 79th Troop Carrier Squadron, 456th Troop Carrier Group, Plaque W-27. We are also honored to have a representative of his family with us today, Jan Hoig from Iowa. Flying Officer Harvey E. Jones, Royal Canadian Air Force, 233rd Squadron, Plaque E-44. First Lieutenant John M. McCutcheon, Tennessee, U.S. Army, 23rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division, Plaque W-66. Radioman 2nd Class John Norbert Murphy, Kansas, U.S. Navy, 6th Naval Beach Battalion, Plaque W-26. Private 1st Class David C. Peterson, Pennsylvania, U.S. Army, 38th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division, Plaque W-27. Private 1st Class Foster P. Reeder, Pennsylvania, U.S. Army, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, Plaque W-66. Technician 5th Class Edward L. Retz, New York, U.S. Army, 397th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion, Plaque W-106. Flight Officer Frank George Ruddick, United Kingdom, 140 Squadron, Royal Air Force, Plaque E-44. And Private 1st Class Werner C. Tiarks, Wisconsin, U.S. Army, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, Plaque W-26. With these additions and other corrections, there are now 4,426 names on our wall, of whom 2,509 are Americans. We honor each one of them. They are our heroes. This is their memorial. Join me now in a prayer of dedication for the new additions to our necrology wall. Let us pray. Our Father, you who are called the Lord mighty in battle, 80 years ago on this day, you delivered to our allied forces a great victory, one which opened up a path to liberate Western Europe from oppression, and a victory which in so many profound ways continues to shape the world we know. But it was indeed a costly victory. We gather today surrounded by plaques bearing thousands of names of the men who fell that day. And we gather to recognize 15 men now added to this roll of honor and courage. May all visitors to this place who gaze upon this wall pause to reflect on the true costs of freedom and on the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice necessary in the past and necessary today to safeguard our liberties. We dedicate these plaques now to the sacred cause of memory, and we rededicate ourselves to keeping memory alive. Bless the memory of these 15 men, heroes all. Bless each one who gathers here today, and may we ever be found faithful in ensuring that every story lives on. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we prepare now for our final aerial demonstration, and we have had the chance today to witness not only the trainers, but the liaison aircraft and a few of the frontline fighters of World War II. The catalyst that holds them all together were the advanced trainers, today being represented by the North American AT-6 Texans, approaching 4 of these examples in the fingertip formation. The T-6 Texan was best known as the pilot maker. This nearly 3-ton trainer was the last airplane a cadet would fly before earning their wings, and they'd move onwards to flying the fighters, bombers, and transport aircraft. Initially, the Army Air Corps called it the AT-6, Advanced Trainer 6. The Navy designated it the SNJ, signifying S for Scout, N for Navy, and J was North America's Alpha code as its manufacturer. The British Commonwealth countries dubbed it the Harvard, as it was indeed an institution of higher learning. Powered by the 9-cylinder, 600-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine, they have a top speed of about 208 miles per hour. Formation flying is very difficult for those who do it. It takes a great deal of trust and concentration by all the players involved. It is the flight leader's responsibility to lead the flight, being the outside eyes to work the airspace and fly the formation as one unit. The wingmen, their job is fairly simple: to keep themselves visually locked on to that through the leader's movements and to his aircraft, often lining up a paint line or a rivet line or another distinguishable marking in order to maintain that position. Sources vary on the number of these aircraft built, ranging from 10,000 to 22,000. However, according to the official historian of North American aviation, the full number will truly never be known. High and overhead right now, the 4-ship fingertip formation, the North American T-6 Texans. Students affectionately called this airplane the Terrible Texan. It was the T-6 that had retractable landing gear, a variable pitch prop, and they said if you could master the T-6, you could fly just about anything, and that remains still very true to this day. It was a formidable aircraft and was later used in the Korean conflict as well, where they outfitted on pylons underneath the wings white phosphorus rockets. They would serve as observation aircraft known as mosquitoes for the heavy jet fighters above. They would find the enemy, fire those rockets, and produce these huge volumes of white cloud, and they'd message up to the fighters to hit the smoke. Additionally, the Texan was responsible for teaching pilots how to fly in instrument conditions in the clouds, otherwise known as flying blind, without outside visual reference. Those R1340 radial engines at power, and that sound that we're hearing right now is in fact not so much the engine, but rather the propeller tips going supersonic at around 2,400 revolutions per minute. In fact, creating small, miniature sonic booms. It was the design of the T-6 that was so great that in no small way helped lead the way to the development of many other aircraft, including that of the P-51 Mustang that we had the chance to see earlier today. They share a few similar design features. Our aviators working very hard today in these gusty conditions at altitude as they continue to maintain that fingertip formation. In just a moment, our T-6 Texans will be positioning for a flyover of the monument in the missing man configuration. They will work their way inbound in that fingertip formation, and the flight leader will set the altitude and the airspeed and the heading in order to fly this formation inbound. And on his call, we will then see the number 2 positioned aircraft, Dash 2 as it is known, pull and fly west, signifying that of a fallen aviator. In light of their mission, as guardians of our liberties and freedoms, members of our military are often asked to bear the burden of our country's defense, a task that is sometimes asked of these brave men and women to give their lives in her name. The places are often foreign: Iwo Jima, Bastogne, Fallujah, Hanoi, Normandy, Baghdad. Foreign they may be, their names hold a significance to the families of the loved ones who were lost there. In the air, on the land, or at sea, there are consequences to ensuring the values of freedom. The man or woman who never returns back to base, the revetment that remains empty after the mission, the echoing silence of the missing man in the roll call. It is to these fallen heroes, ladies and gentlemen, that the Missing Man Formation is dedicated. The symbol of the pilot and plane leaving the formation to never return, departing friends who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Ladies and gentlemen, as our formation approaches, I ask that you join me in a moment of silence, and may we dedicate this missing man to those who have fallen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention and respect. My name is Luke Carrico. It has been an honor to bring you the aerial action here today as part of the 80th anniversary commemoration of D-Day here at the National D-Day Memorial. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed veterans, distinguished guests, the honorable members who represent our allies of yesterday and our allies of tomorrow, my fellow grateful Americans, what an honor it is, what a privilege it is to join you here in Bedford at our National D-Day Memorial. What an honor it is to stand in front of you. What a privilege it is to stand in front of you and revere and commemorate with profound gratitude the courage and the sacrifice that so many heroes made on that fateful day. 80 years ago today, history was made. American heroes, alongside heroes from nations around the world, our allies and our friends, fought and died for precious freedom. It was an invasion of unprecedented scale, where so few summoned the strength for so many. Victory was defined. Liberty was won. At a time when we needed heroes, a true band of brothers standing shoulder to shoulder, heard the call and cast the light. With the eyes of the world upon them, they embarked on the Great Crusade, the most consequential, perhaps ever. While the skies roared with the sounds of the battle ahead, the ocean waters below were filled with quiet prayers. They knew whatever was ahead, they would give everything. That full measure of devotion to freedom. the air condensed with anticipation. These heroic men landed on Omaha Beach, and they charged, met by a hail of enemy fire. The sky glowed red. So many fell. Brothers from this town of Bedford, one carrying a Bible that was later found. They continued on over the cliffs to confront and defeat evil. Each step was filled with faith. No matter the cost, they would secure victory. And they changed the course of history. These extraordinary, legendary heroes were drawn to the glow of freedom. Heroes like Corporal Robert Boulay of the United States Marines, serving aboard the battleship USS Texas that day in support of the invasion. Heroes like Sergeant John Birch Jr., U.S. Army member of the 82nd Airborne, who dropped with glider forces as a medic during the invasion. Heroes like the 22 World War II veterans, all of whom are here with us today and honor us with their presence. We see in each of you, we see in all of you what is emblazoned on our nation's heart: faith, honor, sacrifice, unwavering strength. We honor you, and today we say thank you. From this quiet town in Bedford, Virginia, ordinary men did the extraordinary. Company A, the 116th Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, now known forever as the Bedford Boys. They heard the words of Isaiah. Then I heard the Lord asking, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" They each answered faithfully, "Here I am, send me." They left everything they knew, their farms and their families. They crossed an ocean, knowing many would not return. They had an undeniable belief that America stands for something immensely good, that God Almighty grants unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and these rights must be protected and defended. President Roosevelt, as we just heard, and our nation prayed together that these heroes' hearts would be stout to wait out the long travail, to bear sorrows that may come. In their emotions was fear, but in their souls was a conviction, a bravery. They took to prayer, carrying Bibles with them, because they knew that evil must be defeated. That is a hero's heart. That is Bedford. That is the Commonwealth of Virginia, and my fellow Americans, that is the United States of America. The Bedford boys defined us as a nation of patriots, a nation of liberators, a nation of heroes that day. And to the heroes here today, your courage is our call. You are the reason that we say our Pledge of Allegiance loudly, that we sing our national anthem boldly, and that we honor our flag daily. You are the reason that our best days are ahead of us. You stand for everything that is good in America. Today, and though the words are wholly inadequate, may we say thank you to our heroes, may we say thank you to your families, and may we never forget the courage that it took in order to demonstrate what America is all about. We are a nation built on rock. We are built on rock because heroes crossed the Normandy sands. We will now and forever be the American house built on rock, not on sand, where we are the land and the home for the free and the brave. May God bless the Commonwealth of Virginia. May He bless the United States of America, and may He shine His face on this amazing place so that we will never forget the best among us are our heroes. God bless you, and thank you.
Governor Youngkin, veterans, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to remember the men and women in uniform who served during World War II and helped liberate France and Europe. 80 years ago, on June 6, 1944, 73,000 brave Americans landed at Utah and Omaha beaches in Normandy. The landings were unprecedented in scale and complexity. For the French people, though, it was more than a military achievement. It was a sign of hope that the occupation was coming to an end and a new era was dawning. It was a time when people felt that their collective resolve, bolstered by the courage of selfless Americans and other allied forces, would finally prevail over oppression. As we honor this pivotal moment in history, I want to acknowledge the immeasurable debt we owe the veterans here. You had to overcome incredible adversity and brutality to ensure that future generations in France and Europe could grow up in a free world. You left your homes and loved ones and crossed the Atlantic or served in faraway theaters, such as in the Pacific, to end the war and free our continent. Your courage changed the course of history, but we know that freedom came at a price. On D-Day itself, more than 4,400 Allied troops were killed, including more than 2,500 Americans. Thousands more were wounded or unaccounted for. As staggering as they are, these numbers fail to reflect the bravery and selflessness of those young men and the brutality they encountered on those beaches. None of them set out to be a hero, but they all were. The town of Bedford, in particular, paid a heavy price. On July 17, 1944, this small community learned that 19 men had died in the D-Day landings, the country's highest loss in proportion to its population. We will never be able to repay their sacrifices, but we want to honor those brave souls who died that day and express our sincere and everlasting gratitude to their relatives. France has not forgotten, and anyone who has traveled to Normandy knows that the memories of the war are still vivid there. The Normandy American Cemetery in Colville-sur-Mer is the final resting place of 9,388 American soldiers who lost their lives during Operation Overlord. President Joe Biden was there today with French President Emmanuel Macron. Dozens of American veterans returned to Normandy to take part in the commemorations. Many of those who made the journey in the past few days are more than 100 years old. Crowds of people gathered to greet them with applause, cheers, and waving flags. The atmosphere was extremely emotional as both veterans and local residents of all ages were deeply moved by the significance of the moment. We are privileged to be here among friends, and as we are all gathered here, let me reaffirm the unwavering partnership between France and the United States. Our strong ties were forged by friendship and sacrifice. 2 weeks ago, France placed a flame at the tomb of the unnamed soldier in Arlington National Cemetery as a symbol of our gratitude to the United States. That flame, the flame of liberty, was kindled from the flame of the nation, which has been burning under the Arc de Triomphe in Paris since 1923. As it traveled from Paris to Omaha Beach and then across the Atlantic to New York and Washington, the flame of liberty was, in essence, traveling back 80 years, retracing in reverse the route taken by the Allied soldiers to liberate France. This flame represents the joining of our unknown soldiers, fallen on the field of honor. Together, they embody the brotherhood in arms that has united our two countries for close to 250 years now. It represents the light that the United States and France strive to shine in the world by living our values, much like Lady Liberty with her torch. The flame of liberty is a powerful tribute to all of our veterans and those who fought in World War II. 80 years later, as conflict rages in Ukraine and even darker clouds loom on the horizon, we must not forget what those men fought for. Now, more than ever, our enduring bonds must help us overcome the challenges we're facing. We owe it to those who gave their lives to protect freedom. Once again, I want to express France's deep and lasting gratitude to you all. Thank you. Merci. Vive les États-Unis, vive la France, vive l'alliance entre nos deux pays.
It is my great honor and privilege to announce our heroes, our guests of honor, the World War II veterans who are with us. Robert Boulay, U.S. Marine Corps, D-Day veteran. He served aboard the legendary battleship USS Texas, including in support of Operation Overlord on D-Day. He also saw action in the Pacific, in North Africa, and the invasion of southern France. John Birch, U.S. Army, D-Day veteran. He was a medic dropped with glider forces of the 82nd Airborne during the D-Day invasion. Posted with the 99th General Hospital, he endured some of the toughest fighting in France, including the Battle of the Bulge, always attempting to save another life. Charles Lindy Burnett, U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force. Charles was drafted into the Army just after combat operations ended in World War II and later served in the Air Force, rising to the rank of Staff Sergeant. He says he believes he is the only man from Pittsylvania County ever drafted twice. Jack Castle, U.S. Navy, Stationed at the Norfolk Naval Base Air Station during World War II, Jack earned a degree in psychology from American University before he saw further service in the Korean conflict. Later, he served as a naval recruiter in Roanoke and retired as a lieutenant commander. Jerome Jerry DeGraff Jr., U.S. Marines. His service began after all major combat operations ended, allowing him to serve mostly stateside, including stints with the 2nd Marine Division, at the Naval Prison in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and at the Brig at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, rising to the rank of sergeant. Roderick Lewis Edwards Sr., U.S. Navy. He served in the Pacific Theater and the liberation of the Philippines in particular. The son of a Purple Heart recipient in World War I, Ralph has 4 brothers who served in the Army, the youngest of whom was wounded in the Korean conflict. Alvin E. Jerry Fox, U.S. Army. Mr. Fox served in the occupation of Germany with Troop C of the 37th Constabulary Regiment. Ada Hostler Kuhn, Women's Army Corps. Ada served in the WACs in the U.S. and in the European theater, working in a motor pool in Newport News before deploying to France and later Frankfurt and Berlin. Ada was not the only hero in her family. Her brother was killed in Europe on D-Day +7. Richard Enlow II, U.S. Navy. He served in the 33rd Seabees as a carpenter's mate 2nd class aboard the aircraft carrier USS Tarawa. Mr. Enlow participated in the savage invasion of Peleliu in 1944. James Joseph Jefferson, U.S. Navy. Joe served as an electronics technician's mate 3rd class aboard the destroyer USS Breckinridge in the Pacific. In the rapidly developing field of naval electronics, he helped to service the new technology being developed during the war. Robert Key, U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force. Bobby served 12 years in the Army and also later in the Air Force with service in Korea and Vietnam. Henry Bud Mason, Jr., U.S. Navy. Bud served with 2 units of Seabees, the 134th and 144th Construction Battalions in Guam at the end of the war. After he was discharged from the Navy as a Seaman 1st Class, he faithfully served in the Naval Reserves for 8 more years. John McCain, U.S. Army. Mr. McCain served in the Signal Corps in Germany for 2 years. Rupert Melton, U.S. Navy. He served in the Pacific and Asiatic theaters aboard the heavy cruiser USS Los Angeles. He joined the Navy on the 1st anniversary of Pearl Harbor at just 17 years old. With only an 8th grade education, he studied diligently to be rated a signalman 3rd class, passing every test with flying colors and surpassing his shipmates with college degrees. Roy Douglas Minix, U.S. Navy. He served at the Aviation Ordnance School. 3 days before he was 18, he enlisted and he was discharged in 1946. He was also involved in the design of the National D-Day Memorial. Marion Knoll, U.S. Navy. Mr. Knoll served as a motor machinist mate 3rd class aboard LST 779, including tours to Iwo and Okinawa. LST 779 was the first LST to beach on Iwo Jima's shores on D+1 and unloaded much-needed howitzers onto Green Beach. The landing ship also supplied the flag made famous by Joe Rosenthal's epic photo of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. John Owens, U.S. Army. He landed on D-Day +7 at Utah Beach and fought in the battle for Cherbourg. He served in the Army for 3 years. Louis Silcox, U.S. Army. Mr. Silcox was so eager to serve his country in World War II that he enlisted in the Army at age 15, lying about his age. He was soon discovered and sent home, but when he was old enough, he served during the Korean War, where he was a driver for the M39 armored utility vehicle and where he merited the Purple Heart. Joseph Elmer Stroud, U.S. Navy. Mr. Stroud served proudly in the Navy from 1943 to 1946. Ralph Theodore Bud Seuss, U.S. Army. Mr. Seuss served from 1942 to 1946 in the United States as a technician and mechanic on communications equipment, including the crucial teletype machines. Billy Vai, U.S. Army. He served in the European Theater of Operations with the famous 80th Infantry Division. He participated in the Battle of the Bulge and was awarded the Bronze Star. Mr. Vai will celebrate his 100th birthday next week. Dan Valerial, U.S. Marine Corps. Dan enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps as soon as he was old enough and served in the occupation of Europe after combat, helping to clear Mediterranean islands. His unit was also sent to the Middle East as peacekeepers during the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. After his service, he served as a police officer in Washington, D.C., and today still helps to educate student visitors at the National D-Day Memorial. Clarence Bill Wenzel, U.S. Navy. Mr. Wenzel served aboard the aircraft carrier USS Tarawa in the Pacific Theater. He joined the U.S. Navy Reserve right out of college in 1944 and spent 26 weeks in pre-flight training at the University of North Carolina to earn his wings. During his service, he made 72 carrier landings with no wave-offs. Ladies and gentlemen, the World War II veterans.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again so much for being here today as we mark this momentous occasion. We are so honored to have so many veterans with us. We will conclude today's ceremony with our benediction. Again, thank you all for being here. We are watching the weather closely, so if you would like to get on the shuttle buses, they will start running immediately after the ceremony. Be sure to remember your route and look for the bus with your route numbers. And again, thank you all so much. You're welcome to stay, but do be aware of the weather. We are going to have a brief gathering over at Homage as well, if anyone would like to join us. For now, let's close with the benediction.
Almighty God, the creator and upholder of all, who has in every age inspired your servants with courage and skill. Today we give you thanks for the example of those who have gone before us, especially those whom we remember today. For those who deployed on land, for those who fought for freedom from the sky, and those who secured peace from the sea. For all who gave their lives for the nation. And now, for ourselves, grant, O Lord, that we may be conscious of your ruling hand. May we be found watchful at our post. Make us ever mindful of the needs of others, sharing our joys and bearing our burdens in the work you have given us to do. May you keep us always in your love and peace. Amen.